There are moments when life gives you an answer before you even realize you were asking a question. And tonight, something has been uncovered. Something that was never meant to be found this way. A letter. An old letter. A letter written by someone who once held feelings for you so deeply that they could not bring themselves to say them out loud. It had been hidden for a long time. Nobody knew it existed. Nobody knew who it was written for. Until now. And when the person who discovered it began reading the first few lines, they immediately understood something. This wasn't an ordinary goodbye. It was a confession. A confession from someone who had spent far too long pretending that they didn't care. So before you continue, stay with this story until the end. Because the most important words aren't at the beginning. They are waiting near the final part of the letter. And those words may explain something you have been wondering about for much longer than you realize. Maybe you have experienced this before. You met someone, and something about the connection felt different. You couldn't explain it logically. There was something familiar about them. The conversations felt strangely easy. Their presence affected you in ways you didn't expect. Sometimes you could sit in silence with them and still feel understood. Other times, one small disagreement could create days of distance. And yet, no matter how much time passed, something inside you refused to completely let go. Then came the separation. Maybe it happened suddenly. Maybe there was an argument. Maybe circumstances became complicated. Maybe one person simply stopped communicating. Maybe nothing dramatic happened at all. And somehow, that was even harder. Because when there is a clear ending, the heart knows where to place the pain. But when there is no explanation, the mind keeps searching. You start asking questions. Did they ever really care? Did I misunderstand everything? Was I the only one who felt something? Why did they become distant? Why didn't they explain? Why did they leave when everything seemed so meaningful? And sometimes, the hardest question is the one you never say aloud. Do they still think about me? The letter may finally answer that. The person who discovered it found it inside an old box. There were photographs inside. A few forgotten documents. Some objects that clearly belonged to another chapter of someone's life. And beneath everything else was an envelope. The envelope had been folded and placed carefully between two pieces of paper. There was no address. No stamp. No indication that it had ever been mailed. Only one name. Your name. At first, the person thought it might be an old note. Something insignificant. But then they opened it. The first paragraph began with an apology. Not an apology for one particular argument. An apology for everything that had remained unsaid. The writer admitted that they had wanted to speak to you many times. They had imagined the conversation. They had rehearsed the words. They had even imagined how you might respond. But every time they came close to reaching out, something stopped them. Fear. Pride. Uncertainty. And perhaps the fear that they had already lost the right to come back. They wrote that they didn't know where you were emotionally anymore. They didn't know whether you still remembered them. They didn't know whether hearing from them would bring happiness or pain. So they remained silent. But silence didn't erase their feelings. It only gave those feelings more room to grow. The writer confessed that there were nights when they searched through old memories. They remembered conversations you probably forgot. They remembered tiny details. The way you laughed when you were trying not to laugh. The way your expression changed when you became serious. The way you listened when they talked about things they normally kept hidden. They remembered the moments when you encouraged them. And they admitted something surprising. They didn't realize how important those moments were until they no longer had them. Sometimes we don't understand the value of a person's presence while they are standing beside us. We only understand it when their absence becomes part of our daily life. That was what happened to this person. They began noticing your absence everywhere. A song reminded them of you. A place reminded them of you. A random phrase reminded them of something you once said. Even ordinary moments became connected to memories. They could distract themselves. They could stay busy. They could meet other people. But whenever life became quiet, the memories returned. And that's when they realized something. They had not moved on. They had simply become better at hiding it. The letter continued. The writer admitted that they had made mistakes. They knew they had confused you. They knew their behavior had been inconsistent. One day they acted deeply connected to you. The next day they seemed distant. They admitted that you probably wondered whether you had done something wrong. But you hadn't. The problem wasn't that you weren't enough. The problem was that they didn't know how to handle what they felt. They had spent years learning how to protect themselves. They had learned not to depend on anyone. Not to reveal too much. Not to become vulnerable. Not to let another person have enough power to hurt them. And then you appeared. And suddenly, all those defenses became useless. You reached a part of them that nobody else had reached. That frightened them. Instead of moving closer, they moved away. Instead of explaining, they became quiet. Instead of admitting that they were scared, they acted as though they didn't care. And the letter contained a sentence that explained everything. They wrote, "I thought distance would make my feelings disappear. It only made me understand them." Think about that. They weren't running because there was nothing there. They were running because there was too much. But they knew that wasn't an excuse. They knew their fear had caused you pain. They knew you deserved clarity. And that is why the letter became more honest as it continued. The writer admitted that they sometimes wondered what would have happened if they had been brave. What if they had told you the truth? What if they had stayed? What if they had chosen communication instead of silence? What if they had stopped worrying about how the story might end and simply allowed themselves to live it? Those questions followed them. Not every day. But often enough. And eventually, they understood something painful. They had spent more time fearing the possibility of losing you than actually appreciating the time they had with you. Then came a confession about the last time they saw you. They remembered everything. The place. The conversation. Your expression. The things they wanted to say but didn't. They remembered walking away. And they admitted that they looked back. You may not have noticed. But they did. They looked back because part of them hoped you would still be there. And when they realized you were gone, something inside them broke. They didn't show it. They continued with their life. They smiled. They worked. They spoke to people. They acted normal. But inside, they carried the weight of one unanswered question. Did I just lose the person I was supposed to fight for? For a long time, they didn't know. Then time passed. And something changed. They began to understand themselves. They started recognizing their patterns. They saw how often they ran from good things because they were afraid of losing them. They realized they had confused independence with isolation. They had confused strength with emotional distance. They had believed that needing someone was weakness. But eventually they understood that love does not make a person weak. Dishonesty does. Fear does. Running from every difficult conversation does. Pretending not to care does. And the writer admitted that they were tired of pretending. That sentence was underlined. Tired of pretending. Tired of acting unaffected. Tired of carrying memories alone. Tired of wondering what might have happened. And then they wrote something directly to you. They said, "If you ever read this, I don't want you to think I am writing because I expect you to wait for me." That was important. They weren't demanding anything. They weren't trying to control your future. They simply wanted the truth to exist somewhere. They wanted you to know that you mattered. That the connection mattered. That their silence had never been proof of indifference. Sometimes people don't need another chance as much as they need the courage to finally tell the truth. And this person finally had that courage. Even if the letter never reached you. Then came another revelation. The writer admitted that they had imagined seeing you again. Not in some perfect movie scene. Not with dramatic music. Just somewhere ordinary. A street. A cafe. A familiar place. They imagined seeing you unexpectedly. And in that moment, they imagined having only one choice. Walk away again. Or finally stop. They said that if they ever saw you again, they wouldn't pretend. They wouldn't act cold. They wouldn't look away. They would say what they should have said before. I never stopped caring. But then they added something even more important. I know caring is not enough. They knew that love without action can still hurt. They knew apologies without change mean very little. They knew that returning without accountability would only reopen old wounds. So they didn't promise perfection. They promised honesty. And that may be the difference between someone who simply misses you and someone who has genuinely grown. Missing someone is easy. Changing for the better is hard. The letter described the changes they had been making. They had learned to communicate. They had learned to admit when they were afraid. They had learned that vulnerability wasn't humiliation. They had learned that love wasn't about control. It wasn't about winning. It wasn't about proving who cared less. It was about two people being honest enough to say what they needed. And they wished they had understood that sooner. Then the letter became quieter. The sentences became shorter. Almost as though the writer was becoming emotional. They wrote about one memory in particular. A moment when you looked at them and said something simple. Perhaps you don't remember saying it. But they remembered. You told them that they didn't have to handle everything alone. Those words stayed with them. At the time, they laughed it off. But later, when life became difficult, they remembered. Someone had seen through them. Someone had noticed the weight they were carrying. And that person was you. They wrote. You probably don't know this, but you made me feel safe during a time when I didn't know how to feel safe with anyone. That sentence explained why your absence had been so difficult. You weren't simply someone they liked. You had become associated with peace. And people don't easily forget the person who made them feel safe. The letter then revealed something else. There had been a moment when they almost contacted you. They had your conversation open. Their fingers were on the keyboard. They typed several paragraphs. Then stopped. They thought about everything that had happened. They imagined your response. And instead of sending the message, they closed the screen. But they didn't delete it. They saved it. Because part of them still believed that one day they would be brave enough. Maybe this letter was that bravery. Maybe not. Then came the part that makes this entire discovery so emotional. The writer acknowledged that you might have moved on. They said they understood. They knew you couldn't remain in the same place forever. They knew that while they were processing their feelings, you were living your life. And they said something beautiful. If you are happy now, I hope you never feel guilty for it. That is not the language of possession. That is the language of love finally becoming mature. They didn't want you trapped in the past. They wanted you to be happy. Even if that happiness didn't include them. But then they added one final thought. If there is still a small place in your heart where you remember me kindly, that's enough. The person reading the letter reached the final page. And there were only a few lines left. The handwriting looked different. Almost shaky. The writer had clearly struggled to finish. The first line said, "I don't know when you will read this." The second said, "Maybe tomorrow. Then. Maybe years from now." And finally, "But if you are reading it, please know that there was never a day when I believed you were meaningless to me." Then came the final confession. The writer said they wished they could go back. Not to change everything. Just to return to one moment. One moment when they had the chance to tell you the truth. They wished they had looked into your eyes and said, "I am scared because I care about you more than I know how to explain." Instead, they chose silence. And silence became distance. Distance became time. And time became regret. The last paragraph was almost impossible to read because the ink had faded. But the message was clear. They wrote that if life ever brought you together again, they would not ask you to forget the past. They would ask for the opportunity to understand it. They would listen to your side. They would accept your anger. They would accept your questions. And if you no longer wanted them, they would respect that too. Because loving someone means respecting their freedom. Then came the final sentence. A sentence that made the person holding the letter stop completely. It said, "I hope you never mistake my silence for a lack of love." And underneath it was their name. Nothing else. No promise. No demand. No dramatic goodbye. Just the truth. The letter had finally said everything they had been unable to say in person. And now it had been found. But here's where your part begins. Because perhaps the most important question isn't whether this person will return. The most important question is whether you are ready for the kind of love that doesn't leave you guessing. You deserve someone who can communicate. Someone who can admit when they are wrong. Someone who doesn't disappear whenever emotions become difficult. Someone who doesn't make you spend months wondering where you stand. You deserve a love that feels peaceful. Not perfect. Peaceful. There will still be disagreements. There will still be difficult conversations. There will still be moments of uncertainty. But there should also be effort. There should be reassurance. There should be honesty. And if someone from your past ever comes back, don't judge their return by the words they say in the first conversation. Watch what they do afterward. Do they take responsibility? Do they respect your boundaries? Do they show consistency? Do they understand why you were hurt? Do they make an effort to rebuild trust? Because real change doesn't need to shout. It becomes visible over time. And if this person never returns, that doesn't make the story meaningless. Some people enter our lives to teach us what we need. Some teach us through love. Others teach us through loss. Some show us what we want. Others reveal what we will never accept again. And sometimes, a relationship can change you even if it doesn't last forever. So tonight, don't sit by your phone waiting for a message. Don't stare at the door expecting someone to appear. Don't put your life on pause. Instead, take the truth from this story and carry it forward. You were not difficult to love. You were not too emotional. You were not too much. You were simply asking for something that every healthy heart deserves. Clarity. And if someone couldn't give you that before, they must earn the right to be close to you again. Not with promises. With consistency. Not with nostalgia. With action. Not with temporary emotion. With genuine change. And perhaps tomorrow really will bring something unexpected. Maybe a message. Maybe a conversation. Maybe a chance encounter. Maybe a realization. Or maybe something completely different. Whatever happens, don't fear it. Because your future is not dependent on one person's decision. Your story is bigger than one relationship. Your heart is bigger than one unanswered question. And your life is still moving. But if the person who wrote those words is somewhere out there, still carrying the same feelings, there is one thing they can no longer hide. They cared. They were afraid. They regretted their silence. And somewhere inside them, a part of their heart still remembers what happened between you. The letter was hidden. The truth was delayed. But eventually, it was found. And maybe that is the message you needed tonight. Not that someone is guaranteed to return. Not that you should wait. But that sometimes the truth survives even when people are too afraid to speak it. And if one day you finally hear the words you once waited for, listen carefully. Don't listen only to what they say. Listen to what their actions reveal. Because the right love won't require you to decode every silence. It won't force you to beg for reassurance. It won't make you question your worth. The right love will meet you with courage. And until that happens, keep choosing yourself. Keep healing. Keep moving forward. Keep believing that something better can exist. Because the chapter that hurt you does not get to write the ending. And somewhere beyond all the unanswered questions, there is still a future waiting for you. A future where you don't have to wonder whether you are loved. You will know. Not because someone wrote it in a hidden letter. But because they will show you. Every day.